Welcome into the Sports Ball Grinder here. Coming at you with two shows this week here in mid-May. We'll be on later in the week to talk a lot of auto car racing and stuff with a special guest. So tune in for that. Won't really get into any of that today. Just doing a little bit of a mailbag show today. Received some good thoughts, questions, hot takes, if you will, and I'll hit around on a few other things. First off, thanks so much for listening wherever you're finding the show. If that's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, any of the other outlets, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We appreciate the support here. I do want to do a quick run through of the NBA playoffs now that we are in conference finals time. Boy, it's been entertaining. I'm not going to lie. I've been really impressed with how it has all worked out. But we're now down to the Western and Eastern Conference Finals. Western Conference Finals, you've got the number one seeded Oklahoma City Thunder taking on the Minnesota Timberwolves, who were the 6th seed. But let's be real, those teams were so close together in the West. They were 1 through 6. I mean, it's hard to say who was better than anybody else. Records are kind of funky in the NBA. But you got teams that could really come after each other. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for the Thunder, Anthony Edwards for the Timberwolves. Those are the two names but there's other good players too. Rudy Gobert is still out there. Julius Randle, really handling it for the Timberwolves, particularly off the glass. You got Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren for Oklahoma City. They're deep in the bench as well. It's going to be a really fun series, and I'll be honest with you, I think it's going to go 7. I really do. I think we're going to get 7 games in the Western Conference Finals, and in that case, I'm actually going to go with the Thunder. I think even though they are young, I think they have matured a ton throughout the season. They've carried the mantle, and they got over a big hump getting by a Denver Nuggets team that had found a real spark in the playoffs. And so I'm going to take the Thunder in 7, but I think that's going to make them tired. Because over in the East, you've got what seems like, for at least from my youth, a traditional matchup, the Pacers and the Knicks, but these teams haven't been on that level in a long time. In fact, it's been, a number of years since they were here. And for the Knicks, it's been 25 years of just, mediocrity and below. The Pacers have been up and down and good, but, look, they have both put it together now. Tyrese Halliburton playing great for the Pacers. You got Pascal Siakam doing good work. Isaiah Jackson. I mean, there's some good players out there. And then, of course, Jalen Brunson's leading the charge along with Karl Anthony Towns for the Knicks. And they're an incredible team, deep all the way around. Guys coming into play. But, Brunson's the guy. Brunson and Halliburton are really going to be the ones that drive the engines here. And I keep hearing people say, the Knicks aren't that good. They're not that good. Well, at some point, they're good enough to beat the teams in front of them. They knocked out the Pistons, who were pretty hot coming into the playoffs. They had to do that in 6. They had to beat the Celtics in 6. Even with Jason Tatum going down, the Celtics still pushed them in that one. New York got it done because they came back from 20 down twice. So this team absolutely does not quit. Then on the other side, look, the Pacers took out Milwaukee. That was a good series, but they dominated them. They won that 4-1, and then they 4-1 the number 1 Cavs. And I know Cleveland was beat up, but hey, give it to the Pacers. They have played great basketball going through this. And I think the Knicks are going to give them a lot. I think it's going to be a good series. I think this one's going 6, though, and I'm going to go Indiana on that one because I do think they are playing really smart basketball right now. And the Knicks are right there, but they're not quite there. They may be next year. They might even be a year ahead right now. I think next year, a couple of years down the line, they may be the top team in the Eastern Conference. But for right now, I'm going to go with the Pacers. So I think we're going to get Pacers Thunder in the championship finals. That's my prediction, at least. We'll see how it works out. Conference finals will run through the 1st of June, and then we'll get into the championship games as they come across. Before I get into the mailbag questions, just going to touch real quickly some thoughts on San Francisco 49ers and the big extension they gave Brock Purdy. I think it's smart. I think they didn't overpay him. They did pay him a lot of money, but they didn't underpay him either. They came to a good agreement. The only thing that I am just going to nitpick a little bit about these contracts is this no trade clause business. I get it from the player's point of view. I want to control my destiny. Now I'm getting my money. I want to also control where I get to go next, all that kind of stuff. Why clubs continue to agree to this is beyond me. At some point, that relationship gets to a point where either we are better together and you just keep extending and working together, or you realize, hey, it's time for both of us to move in other directions while we got to make it hard, And for the 49ers, they are gambling on the fact that, hey, our system is so good and this guy has been so smart with it that, hey, we are either going to win this thing in the next 2 or 3 years, or we're just going to cut him loose and move on. But why not give yourself the option to trade him and get something back in return? That's the only part of that I really don't love. But otherwise, it makes a lot of sense. And look, I'm going to go into it later on in the summer. I think the 49ers have had an incredible offseason, and people are sleeping on that, and they shouldn't, particularly when you look at the schedule they got dealt. But more on that later. We got a long summer to get in front of us. All right, now for some mailbag stuff here. And this comes from our friend Matt. Just going to quote it straight out. Truly don't understand how football is the biggest sport in this country, speaking about America. People talk about baseball being boring, but every time I see football, it's just nonstop stopping the play. And okay, I get that. That's fair criticism. Let me tell you why football is so popular. All right, and I can answer this. It is about the action, and that when the action takes place, it's pretty violent. So we're kind of into that in this country. And it's exciting to watch these top-tier premier athletes and also these tacticians, these scheme guys on offense and defense, put together cool plays and make stuff work and all that. People that get into like the mechanics of sports and stuff, it's a fun thing to watch go down. But I'm going to tell you why football is really popular, because it's super easy to consume. You answered it yourself. It doesn't require a ton. Particularly the NFL. College football is getting to the point where they got to figure out how to shorten these games. I know they want to keep selling every second of it, for advertising ratings, and for good reason why. But the NFL has got that down to a science, man. Those games are fleet, and they do that on purpose because they know it's a viewer's experience. It's a sport built for television. And they also know how to keep the conversation going even when the sport's not in session. Look at the NFL. After the Super Bowl, what's the next thing? Free agency. Becomes a big splash. There's always these talks about contracts, etc. Then there's rules voting, which we're still in the middle of. Some more on that, coming up this week probably even. And then you've got the whole draft build up. And then the draft is its own thing. And then what is it after the draft? The schedule release. And what is anybody talking about? They're talking about how many games are getting played in Brazil. Meanwhile, the NHL and the NBA are in championship tournament mode, and they're getting beat in ratings by this. The MLB doesn't even try to beat against that. They're just going to play their season, and they have regionalized themselves in such a way that it's actually protected the sport, from complete collapse, but it also has changed the national landscape of that sport. So the reason football is so popular is because it's easy to consume, and it's completely easy to consume. So just one of those things. But hey, appreciate the question there for sure. Ron sent this one in, and I thought it was a great point. The death of cable contracts and high prices at games will eventually force sports leagues to retract, or at least stop the ever-expanding salary caps. And you're into something there. Football is different. I think it's almost recession-proof. I mean, gosh, it's pandemic-proof. We proved, a few years ago. But he's not wrong that you're seeing now the way sports leagues, the wise ones, the smart ones, particularly the NFL, are working out their license deals and their broadcast deals are so that they can keep those salary caps up. Baseball and the NBA, well, the NBA's already redone the contract, so they got their number. Now they can continue to do what they're doing. Baseball's at that moment where they got to figure something out, or we're looking at another work stoppage, which would be very bad for that sport. The over-the-top cable stuff going away, they've been talking about that for years. And, what's funny and the joke is now is streaming was going to replace cable, and it has. It just costs just the same because now you got to subscribe to 7 different things. I think the part of the problem with some sports is all the things you have to subscribe to be able to follow them and keep up with it. Now, if you're a diehard in something, you're going to go out of your way to do that. You're going to find a way to make that work. But if you're a casual like me, and a lot of people listening to this, you're going to take the path of least resistance. What you're seeing more and more of is people going to the mass gathering situation, the Buffalo Wild Wings or the Flying Saucer like we were at a few weeks ago, to just sit around and watch a few games. Why? Because they'll pay the fee, They'll pay the carriage fee. Restaurants that want to broadcast stuff like that, they have to pay an extra fee on top of that. And that's why your chicken wings cost $12.99, not just because of poultry issues. It's because they can pay for all that stuff. But it's the gathering of it. It makes it fun. Or if you just go to your buddy's house and do it, they can't stop you from doing that. But somebody's got to, have the login, right? I do think we are looking at an interesting place for both the MLB and the NBA because they've talked about expansion. We know there's relocation happening in both leagues, but both have talked about expanding. Be curious to see if that is still on the table for both leagues as they move forward. I know there's a lot of cities that are really vying for professional teams in both baseball and basketball. I don't think the NFL is interested in expanding. The NFL is interested in taking that show on the road. And by the road, I mean stamping the passports. And you may not know this about NFL guys and their game checks, but wherever they play that game, they are taxed based off of where that game is. So if you play for the Dallas Cowboys, but that week you're playing the New York Giants, well, your game check that week is taxed in New York or New Jersey in that case. But when the Giants come to you, well, they're subject to the Texas, tax rate, which means no state income tax, right? And the federal stuff stays the same, but that matters. And when you go internationally, that's a whole other ball of wax. That's why you see a lot of interesting kickers in these guys' contracts, and the way the NFL breaks off like supplemental stuff for these international games for these guys because they know they're having to take a hit for it. Plus the wear and tear on your body when you travel. If you're an athlete at all and you travel, it does something to you. You got to build in a day on either side to get over it. It's not easily done. So I think what I'm curious to see is how those contracts begin to fluctuate and change as we expand the game internationally, particularly football, and then to see what, again, baseball and basketball are going to do. So some interesting stuff there as we go. We'll do one more mailbag question here and then call it a day, if you will. This comes from an anonymous, but it was an interesting post nonetheless, sent here to the Sports Ball Grinder, which you can also do. You can either, comment me on social media at jranhere, or you can email the show, sportsballgrinder@gmail.com. Be glad to take your take or your question. And this one is all about college football. Are they really going to get to a point where things like TV ratings matter when we start seeding the playoffs for the P4? And when will the G5 or G6, depending on how you look at it, just break away and do their own thing? Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I can't really speak to what the G5 are going to do. A big shout out to the Group of Five guys, their podcast and show. Check them out. They're going to keep you way more up to date on that than I am. I'm a big fan of theirs. They do good stuff. As far as what the Power Four is going to do, it does seem like that, right? That we're starting to use really interesting measurements to discuss, and they're starting to float those things out there. Like, well, what if we use TV revenue or TV ratings as a way to rank teams? And what they do is they see how bad people freak out over it. Because in this country in particular, what you have to do is get people to freak out over it. And then once the freak out's over, then you start going, okay, how do we reintroduce this idea? And we go, and they're being sly about it. Watch the way they're wording it. It's like, well, we're not really using the ratings, but let's think about it. Which teams are in those big rating spots? The best teams, right? They have the best players. Why do they have the best players? Because right now they have the most money, or at least access to the most money. And they have access to the most money because they're getting the prime TV slights and contracts, or their conferences are. It is all related. You may not think about it right now, but they're already kind of using that as a measuring stick. Is it right? No, it's dumb, but it is the reality, and it's not going to change anytime soon. We are no more closer to having any kind of rules and guardrails and stuff around college sports than we are to, I don't know, establishing 4 new bowl games or something like that. I mean, it's a long way from happening. And personal opinion here, I don't think you can collectively agree with all of these athletes. Even just the football. Just take that for instance. Just all the football players in Division I football. I don't think you can get them to all agree on anything. That's probably going to have to happen at the conference level, I think. And then there's going to have to be agreements between conference to conference. But we're a long way away from that. But as folks like to say, the most undefeated thing in college sports right now is billable hours, and it'll continue to be that way. We're going to wrap it up there for today here on this quick Sports Ball Grinder Mailbag show. Be back later in the week again to talk some NASCAR, a little bit of Indy 500, and some other topics with a special guest. But again, thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon. Stay in the grind. Sports Ball